how do you refer to someone as an expat versus an immigrant?
The idea of immigrant, it has a negative connotation.
How about a nomad?
Ooh, I like
that. I think that's more.
That's why I always use talent, yeah?
I would unify Europe. I would have Europe as one country.
It's not just the way how we perform work, but also the way that we organize work.
We need to somehow activate these voices that tell a positive story about migration being a success.
We just travel with our skills everywhere and, drop our bags and start working.
Okay, hello everyone. First and foremost, I'd like to thank everybody for being here today. My name is David Cantor. I'm the founder of Relocate. We're an independent platform for global migration. So this is no doubt an important and timely moment to be hosting an intimate roundtable discussion that revolves around pressing topics related to global migration. Just last week, we had a call with our host partner, the Student Hotel, and we were fairly excited because restrictions were being eased in the Netherlands, and we could actually move on with this event. And then international headlines were taken hostage yet again, and a globally alarming event, as we all know. So still, we are here now, where I believe is a somewhat symbolic place and a meaningful place that takes on a bit more light at the moment. The Hague, so a city that is aged in wisdom, aged in action, on the path to international justice. We also have individuals here who are vested personally and professionally in the topics that we will be discussing and exploring today. And we'll also be exploring what is here, where is here, in our contemporary context. So anyone who is out there for also the live streaming, which we are live, please feel free to participate, ask questions. We will see it here. We'll be able to address it up here. And obviously everyone who is attending in person today, we always have a seat at the round table, and you're welcome to join, express your thoughts, engage our speakers. And I guess I would like to hand this over to Srividya with one more proverbial sentiment that I think has stuck with us from the beginning. If I'm to choose if I'm forced to choose between my country or the world, I choose the world. For borders are nothing more than fixations of man, and man is but a creation of this world. So thank you all for being here today. Really honored to have you and privileged to have you today. Hopefully you stick through the whole session. Yes.
Thank you, David. Welcome, thank you all for coming. I'm Srividya, I'm the Director of Communications for Relocate. So without further ado, we'll go with a round of introductions and then we'll start with the questions.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, everybody. My name is Menno Bart. I'm a Senior Public Affairs Manager at the Adecco Group. We are an HR services company with services in almost 60 countries around the world. And my focus is really on labor markets and on the wider frameworks that we all work in. And before I hand over, I also want to echo David's sentiment of how privileged we are today to discuss mobility and free movement, thinking of all the people who cannot do so today in Ukraine.
Thank you very much, Menno. Hi, everybody. My name is Sandrine Leclef. I'm a Managing Director at Expatriate. We are a company based in Belgium, Antwerp, where we are specialized and foremost passionate about everything that relates to global mobility, especially immigration matters, social security matters, tax-related questions. We specialize in that. So we are really on the ground where we help companies and individuals moving around the globe in terms of getting the right work permits, visa, family reunification issues, etc. So this is what we do every day. Thank you.
Awesome. So I guess this is a good place to start, Sandrine. The foundational question of Relocate is how we treat mobility, global mobility and movement across borders more as a solution rather than a problem, right? Now more than ever, well, in 2020, 4% of the world population were migrants. They were living outside of where they were born. Mm-hmm. And in the 2 years, we can only imagine that that number has gone up, given everything that we've witnessed and are witnessing. So what stands in the way of, or how can we remove the barriers and look at this as a solution rather than pondering about what a big problem it could pose?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I think it's a very good question. I think post-pandemic, if I can start thinking post-pandemic, there is a lot of things that are changing. And I think that it is up to employers especially to rethink the models of today. I think communication is key between employers and their personnel. Where it is possible, I would engage in flexibility towards the workforce, and I do understand it's not always easy because definitely it's very important to have this integrated community within your workforce to make sure that everybody stays connected and everything. And I think this is a big problem today, is that people feel disconnected because they haven't been to work, they haven't been to their workplace, but also across the globe. I think, to go back to your real question, is that where are we going to facilitate the moves? I think we have a lot of things that we still have to look at, and especially within the European Union. Mm-hmm. We do have non-EEA nationals have the tendency to think, I'm coming to the European Union and I can work everywhere and I can reside everywhere. Yeah. And that might be true in a way, but for example, when you would like to come and work in Belgium, and you would have a residence card for Germany, let's say, you're not automatically allowed to work in Belgium. The national legislation within every European country is still the one that is, that has to be looked at and has to be respected. Yeah. And so with everything that is decided on an EU level, it still has to be adopted by every country. And so this is something that I do believe that we could make. We could make it better by trying to unite more. Yeah.
We have Damian joining us, and I think it is perfect timing to pose this question to you. So how do we make this better? How do we look at? I'm sorry. Can you hear us, Damian?
I can hear you now loud and clear. It cut out a bit in the beginning, but now it seems to be working. Everything.
Perfect. So you maybe want to give us a very short introduction, although we probably all know. But yeah, we were talking about how, given the reality we find ourselves in, the migratory crisis and everything, the way the world is changing every minute, how can we look at global mobility and movement across borders or even within the EU as a solution rather than, tout it as a problem?
Yeah, so absolutely. I mean, when we started, founding Volt, our perspective was always that we somehow need a more European perspective on many of the issues of our time. That can be climate change, that can be, topics of let's say digitization or other topics you care about. But for me, it was always also about migration. And I would differentiate a bit between the asylum part, if you want the more humanitarian perspective, and the other perspective, which is more about attracting talent, making Europe attractive for third country nationals to come. And I mean, the asylum part I'm currently working on a lot, as you can imagine, because of the recent war and invasion of Russia into Ukraine. But I will put that a bit to the side for 1 second and focus maybe a bit more on attracting talent. And here, I completely agree with you. The issue is that currently we have a fragmented labor market. Yeah. So, I mean, to share some personal perspective on this, my partner is actually Canadian, and when you look from that perspective at Europe or at the US as a potential target labor market to migrate into, you in the beginning think, okay, I mean, they're similar size, like they have similar opportunities, and I'll see where I can get. But then you understand that if you get fired in Detroit, you can easily find a job, like anywhere else in the US, because you have that visa for that whole country. Whereas if you get fired, to say being in Brussels, you won't be able to go to Lisbon easily to like relocate. So that definitely means that whereas we have the freedom of movement for EU citizens, we definitely don't have that at all for third country nationals. And that's something that I've been trying to work on since I got elected in 2019. So, for example, in the Blue Card Directive, which is for highly talented and highly skilled labor, if you want, and here we managed to get that actually in. So you're allowed to move from one member state to the next within 1 month. After you've been in one country for a year, you can easily move. And what's even more important, you can take the years that you agglomerated towards a long-term residence permit, you can take them with you. So like, let's say you work for 1 year in Belgium and you want to move to Portugal, then you can take this 1 year with you and say, okay, now I can still, work towards my long-term residence permit. And so I think that's positive. I mean, there's a lot of other stuff that we have been trying to do to make this work a bit more easily. For example, we proposed a talent pool, which basically allows people from outside the EU to register their interest to work in the EU as a whole. Not just one member state, but just say, like, look, I want to work within the EU. And the Commission luckily took that up, and it will also be proposed in a couple of months. And then basically as a third country national, you can say like, hey, I want to work in the EU, and then the Commission might pre-screen a bit, and then you still need to go through the national procedures of, getting your visa, but it allows for maybe a common pre-screening and for employers to just look at this pool of talent from outside to come. So, I mean, I can give you many more examples of what we're doing in writing the group position and like negotiating now the long-term residence directive and so on. But maybe to close, there's like very short intro. And for me, Europe needs to understand that it has to either become an immigration society or it will lose out in any category that you can think of. Yeah, strategically, GDP, economic, whatever. I mean, our pension systems are not going to work, and you can think about all these perspectives. And also, I think it's the right way to go. And we still need to talk about brain drain on the other side, but that's a more complex topic. But overall, I think we need to understand that we have to become immigration societies. And that means we need more positive narratives about migration. And I'm therefore very happy that Relocate also tries to go in this direction to shape a bit more of a positive narrative. And I think that's exactly the way to go.
Yeah. And while we are at this, and I know that there is some proposal or at least some thought about giving remote work or a framework for remote work within the EU, should we consider, a proposal on remote work as a competing force to attracting, say, talent to live in a particular country? Can both those systems or both those proposals work hand in hand, right? Can we still have talent that is not in Europe, but still employed by European companies?
Maybe a super quick reaction, and then I leave it to you. But I think we have to understand that this assumption that we work where we live, or we live where we work, is also extremely relevant for Europe internally. Yeah, I mean, it's impossible currently to work from Portugal if you have an employment in Germany, and this is something we need to somehow separate this, and then we can also talk about, globally. But if you talk about this topic, we're like 10 years away from an actual, solution to this.
Yeah.
If I could add to that, because I think actually I fully agree with you, and by the way, congrats on putting this item on the agenda in the European Parliament. But I think the two won't compete with each other. Remote work, attracting talent virtually from other places versus immigration, simply because the talent scarcity will be so massive that we need all the talent we can get in any way we can get it in the next decades. We've already seen in the past 2 years big labor market shifts, but most of those shifts are part of trends that have been going on for much longer. Okay. Aging societies, new skills needs that not necessarily we are able to fulfill with the talent that we have within Europe, and just new expectations from workers as well towards how they want to work.
Yeah.
And all that taken together, I think I fully agree that Europe needs to make a quick change towards becoming more of an immigration society.
Yeah.
We need all the talent we can get.
I mean, I think your job must have gotten very interesting in the past 2 years, you know, studying workforce management and demands from people like employers and employees. So what are some of your highlights from, you know, doing this work in the past 2 years and everything that's been changing?
I mean, there's lots of angles that you can look at. I think, first of all, the COVID lens itself shows just that in the past 2 years, we've had, first of all, massive impact on the labor market through people who all of a sudden were not able to work anymore. Mm-hmm. We saw sectors that were in rapid decline and other sectors that all of a sudden came up exponentially, like e-commerce, for example. And so both demand and supply on the labor market changed. In addition to that, because all of a sudden we were forced to work in a different way, preferences also changed. People realized, this is now also, all of a sudden, this is also an opportunity. Companies also realized that things have changed and that things might be possible that weren't deemed possible before. And that then adds up to the larger trend of, it's not just the way how we perform work, which is either on-site or remotely, but also the way that we organize work. So maybe we don't all have a full-time open-ended contract anymore. Maybe there is more ways of making sure that as a company, when you have a task, how do you want that task performed? Does it need to be in-house, or maybe you can hire an agency worker, or maybe you can hire a freelancer. Maybe that freelancer doesn't need to be on-site but can be remotely. Or maybe you break up the task in little subtasks that you each have solved in a different way. And with the advent of digital platforms and all sorts of new ways of organizing work, that also again changes supply and demand on the labor market.
Yeah, and I think, you know, if we had to bring global mobility and cross-border movement still as a center of how we organize work, how essential does it become to, you know, have a review of work permit and employment authorization laws to move forward? If we can have Damian comment on that, and I want to bring that back to Sandrine because I know you have a lot to say about that.
Yeah, maybe just I want to take one thing back that I said, which I said probably to make a point that we need 10 years to go to the remote work point.
Okay.
I just wanted to correct myself because I don't think we have that time. So I wish we were much faster here in the European Parliament and in the EU in general to come up with a closer view on that. There's a huge complexity when it comes to all the social security questions, taxation and so on. And it's basically, I think, with Volt, we want this European Federation kind of thing, and I think we need to have some core state functions on the European level to be able to get there, and I would love to find ways to simplify that. I think in general, and I made this point just now, we need to get faster at trying to understand what the labor market needs are and trying to build some form of employment options around it. I mean, now I was kind of lucky that the blue card was being revised, which allowed me to put some stuff in there. I mean, for example, with some other people, we've also fought for the fact that if you have a tech education, you don't need education, but you need the skills, and that means that you don't need to show that you have a master's degree to get the blue card, because it doesn't make any sense if your GitHub profile is amazing, so it's a bit like looking into these kind of things, and obviously it was only possible because we just had the revision of the blue card. So how can we make it easier to more often update the regulation that is there? I think is a crucial question. Honestly, what would help is if we as a European Parliament would be able to open legislation whenever we want that, which is in technical terms called the right of initiative, because then if there is a need, we would be able to just trigger, even targeted changes to certain regulations to ensure that this is happening. But we are definitely not there yet. And as you said, I think also in the beginning, since it's a so-called shared competence, really, it's always still, most of the times up to the member states to come up with, how they want to implement this on the national level. And here I have to disclose to you that our countries and governments are not really representing the interests of migrants, not really representing the interests of even their own businesses, but really fighting for national power over migration issues. And this is something that we also need to call out. And this is true for the German government, as it is for the Dutch government, as it is for every government, because they don't want to give away this power of actually, controlling migration to a certain extent.
Yeah. And Sandrine, where, if you were, tasked with kind of solving this problem or just brainstorming, where would you start? What would be, point A on that agenda?
I think that in my ideal world, let's say, in terms of immigration perspective, I would unify Europe. I would have Europe as one country, where there's one government.
Right answer.
No, but that is how I feel that we could get to a definitely more efficient way of getting regulations through, of putting aside a lot of tension between sometimes different member states that are trying to, to meet certain levels of expectation. Mm-hmm. And so just to go to look at the migration side, there's not only the migration, but there is also the social security, the labor law, the taxes, and everything. I always see it as a puzzle. Everything goes hand in hand. From the moment that you have one person moving from one country to the other, you have all these different things that come into play, like, as I said, labor law, immigration, social security, taxes, insurances, actual relocation of people, and this brings with this one move so much, consequences. Mm-hmm. And so, if you ask me for a solution, I'd say let's unify Europe and let's work with one government. But then I come from Belgium, and Belgium is very complex, as you all know. We have several governments. We have regional authorities that are competent for work. Then we have federal authorities that are competent for residents. And so, when I look at only Belgium, let's say, a lot of people sometimes come to me and they say, "Listen, I want to come to Belgium. I want to open my residence rights." And my first answer is, okay, let's see what we can do. Let's listen. What's your story? Where you've been? Obviously, we only focus on economical migration. So we often get highly qualified employees, very technical profiles as well. But the thing is that we try to help them by, let's say, shopping.
Yeah.
In terms of, okay, in the Flemish area, we can do this. In the Brussels area, we can do this. And then there we have... So, as Damien was saying, every country is fighting for their own national rules and what they want to continue, and not so much looking for international skills to come. They are, but it's not their first. It's not on their first agenda point, let's say. Mm-hmm. And so when I spoke a few weeks back with someone from the Flemish Labour Department, they told me it can't be the intention of a foreign national to come to Belgium to put up a business or to for residence rights. So the whole idea of the golden visa, as we know it, mm-hmm. That shouldn't be a first intention to come to Belgium. They really want people to work, to open employment rights, and then open residence rights. So that's the talent that they are really looking for. Mm-hmm. And I think if we could get more work permits and more different types of like the EU blue card, being a type of work permission that does give you national rights, but also rights within the EU, and also residence rights, because to the EU Blue Card, you get this H card, and then that card gives you more flexibility around Europe. Now there's also this L card. It's like more like a durable stay card, which gives you 10 years of residence in Belgium. I mean, you do have to qualify, but then again, it gives you rights within the EU to increase mobility. Then you have this ICT regulation, which in Belgium only was implemented in December, mid-December, whereas in other countries it's been implemented a lot, sooner.
Yeah.
So we have a lot of good initiatives, but it's
more fragmented.
Yes,
and not together. I actually want to bring you in and ask you the power of employers in all this.
I think employers indeed do and should have a lot of power in this space because I think when I look around the room and when I also hear some of the personal stories of some of the speakers that we'll hear later, of course, a lot of these people are sort of supply driven, right?
Yeah.
I am smart, I have something to offer, and therefore I decide to move to another country where I hope to find employment. But I think the biggest bulk of labor migration actually comes and should come from a demand-driven motivation. Companies have certain labor market needs which they cannot fulfill with talent that is available locally, and therefore they start looking abroad. And let's be honest, not all of those people will have the ability to be supported by Sandrine and her colleagues, or so they need something that is much easier and much more straightforward. And so I think indeed it's up to companies to really push much harder for the type of immigration systems that companies need. And not just for a few specialized professions, but increasingly also for more blue-collar work. Think about the care industry, nurses from around the world, which we all need in our industries, and there are just not enough people around here. And so you see slowly but surely some successful corridors being set up from the Philippines to Germany, or from Poland to Norway, or Mexico, and so you see those corridors being set up, and then it actually works.
Yeah.
But often those are very specific bilateral agreements between one country and another, saying, okay, let's set up this particular corridor for this particular group of people because we need them right here, right now.
Yeah, and I think you bring a very interesting point into the mix. How can we look at attracting talent into the area as being more collaborative rather than competitive, right? Is there a way that we can set up pathways for people to easily move and, so to speak, these corridors, but also for it to meet some national demands for the time being until we have Europe as one country? Do you want to maybe reflect on that, Damien?
Yeah, sure. I mean, look, the Swedish model is something that I quite like. They are trying to reverse it now because it was too extreme for them in the end. But they have a double-blind system, which means they don't care where you come from. So the country of origin is completely irrelevant. And they don't care which skill category you have. But basically, the only thing they care about is, do you have a contract, a work contract, like a job offer, basically, in the country where you want, so in Sweden in this case. Yeah? And I think this is, it's an extreme model, but this is a horizontal perspective on like a European work permit that you could give out just based on this double-blind system. And it would be quite extreme, to be honest. Yeah? But since we're not there yet, and since we discussed a bit about the role of our governments, I think we need to utilize the private sector, as you've also said. I've set up, I was quite annoyed, to be honest, after the blue card negotiations, because I had the feeling that my own government is pushing against the interest of our businesses, and I'm not actually sure for what kind of interest they were pushing in any case, to try to reduce the blue card, for example, to not allow nursing personnel to also be included under the personnel that doesn't need to have a degree. Because that's obviously a huge labor market need in almost all EU countries, so it doesn't really make sense. But anyways, they were fighting against it, and so I thought, okay, how about we bring businesses in? And I founded something which I called the Open Employers Pledge, which is basically just a couple of businesses saying, look, we need a more Europeanized system to do that. And I mean, my strategy is very simple. There are all these cool unicorn, enterprises that politicians love to stand around with and say like, oh, we are so successful, our startups, blah blah, and them actually saying like, look, yeah, but you're harming us by having a rather shitty immigration system. So I think that's one thing. And then, I mean, I want to bring also in a bit like the social or like the societal aspect, and I've mentioned this in the context of immigration society earlier. I mean, I do also believe that we need to change fundamentally how we see, citizenship and residence and so on in our countries. Because, I mean, in the asylum world, you talk about the double trauma, and you leave your country because you have to, your country of origin, and you lose that identity, and then you come here, and you're not given the identity of being a European or being a German or whatever. And that actually produces then like a double trauma and can lead to like really negative effects, both individually and for society. So I think we need to somehow also really get away from the way that we see immigration right now to make this a success in the end, from a societal, if you want, perspective.
Yeah, and I think, I don't know, this is not something that we've discussed in detail, but what is the role of, bridging skill gap? How does that, impact everything? Like, should that be like an agenda point that is being worked on continuously, where we look at training, where we look at education, also equipping, people who, or accreditation, where people might already have this skill, might already be, doctor or a lawyer somewhere else, but they don't have to come and work at, like, say, a bakery or as a tax professional or an accountant in another country, where they can actually follow the paths that the professional path that they're already have been on. That's something I think, I don't know if it's getting lost in the mix and how important it is to be, to address it now. Menno, if you want to.
Yeah, absolutely. You're absolutely right. I think when companies or anyone thinks about skill shortages, then there's one of two answers. It's either labor mobility or re- and upskilling. And as I said before, in my view, we can't choose. We need to do both. But to come back to what Damian just said, I think identity and the idea of people moving into your country, it's such a politically sensitive issue.
Yeah.
I fully agree that, I mean, I see my identity as layered and as being a European as well as a Dutchman but I also can imagine that other people might feel more threatened. I mean, in the end, migration and mobility was the whole reason behind Brexit. There were lots of other things going on, but in a way, and whether it's right, whether it's justified or not, but that was what most of the conversation was about. And so it's easy for us to say, well, if there's a skill shortage, then we just should get the talent from abroad. I do believe we need to do that, but I also believe there needs to be invested in making sure that you don't leave the people at home behind. So indeed, re- and upskilling of those who might be unemployed, who might be long-term unemployed, making sure that education systems per se connect to the labor market much better than they do today. Too often you see people graduating and then still not having the right skills that companies are actually looking for, and then needing to still already start with re- and upskilling just after they graduate, which is madness in a way.
I guess companies don't want to pay so much like learning development or training right at the beginning to make somebody they just hired more employable, right?
And to some degree, I would also challenge many businesses there saying, well, actually, you might need to step it up yourself as well. I mean, we can't just look at governments and say, you sort out the education part. No, that's not how it works. Companies need to step it up, for example, in work-based learning and apprenticeship programs, making sure that people have that smoother transition from education into work. And that also requires a more active involvement from companies.
Yeah, I just
if you had
maybe want to pick up on that, is that I think that people, foreign nationals who have studied in Europe, in several countries, you now have like a visa that's called a search year visa.
Yeah,
I don't know
like
if
a
it's the
job
right.
seeker
Yeah,
visa
like job
in
seeker
Germany.
visa.
Yeah.
I think that is very positive, and that it's been a very good thing that has been implemented, because it does give students who have just graduated, who had to do some internships within several companies within Europe, the possibility to learn and to learn on the job, because I think that is still the best way to evolve and to grow into the culture of a company. So yeah, just to add on what you just said, is that this visa is there, and it should be used up to its maximum, because it gives the, it gives the employer the opportunity to, yeah.
And Damian, maybe you could probably, chime in here. And what are some of the legacy institutions that could be a part of this discussion? So should it be universities? Of course, government, we've been talking about government, but if you had to, put forth this or seek partners, where would you look?
Yeah, I mean, for example, I think you need to be concrete in a bit the questions or like the demands you have. So for example, for job seekers, for me, it makes absolutely no sense that they can only look for a job in that country where they graduated, when they graduated from a European university. I mean, again, like, it's absolutely idiotic, and it has, let's say, cascading effects to the question of, do I actually want to even study in a European university, and in which country do I actually, do this graduating program? And then obviously Germany is a bit more attractive than, for example, maybe smaller labor markets. So I think that's something where we need to really, get a bit away from. I mean, I love to think about strategy. And so the question is, who are your allies traditionally, but also unorthodox allies to somehow push this kind of narrative? And that's why I was talking about business leaders, because while they generally obviously like to have skills, they are not very vocal politically about the whole question of, I want a more open migration system. But talent is like a huge shortage by now. I mean, just to give you one example, in Berlin of the tech sector, I recently learned that, because there was more capital flowing into Berlin. The numbers are going up a lot. Yeah, so there's a lot of money, and everything that these companies need is tech talent. And so recently, I heard that one of the bigger new startups called every programmer in Berlin, every senior programmer in Berlin, and offered them triple what they're currently earning. Yeah? So you have now salaries that go from 900,000 to 2 million base salary without bonus included for some of these senior, programmers. And I think, that has effects on inflation and and housing market, and we can go through a lot of topics there. But I think it's just, we need to somehow activate these voices that tell a positive story about migration being a success, that somehow get out there. And if you have ideas of how to use that, for example, the French government is, at least on tech stuff, quite strong right now, so we can use that a bit. And maybe there are some universities who have loud voices, but I think it's definitely a story that a narrative that we need to push, so that politicians like myself at some point take this up and actually bring it into the national policies, because currently they're really restrictive.